If you are a high income earning millennial, you've probably felt like a traditional financial advisor doesn't quite fit. And that's because it really wasn't built for you. This industry was not built for the people that are building wealth, that are going to be the next generation of entrepreneurs, of wealth creators. It was for people that have already arrived. In this video, I want to dive into the challenges that a lot of millennials face when it comes to wealth management, financial planning, investment management, and why 4 Points Wealth has built the processes and systems to work directly with those clients. If you are a high income earning millennial with big life changes, whether that's getting married, having children, or potentially career shifts, new income, big jumps in income, equity compensation, RSUs, ISOs, ESPPs, you've probably felt like a traditional financial advisor probably doesn't quite fit. And that's because it really wasn't built for you. This industry was not built for the people that are building wealth, that are going to be the next generation of entrepreneurs, of wealth creators. It was for people that have already arrived. And I've seen this time and time and time again. And that's why at 4 Points Wealth, we have built a structure that is directly focused on those people that are in that period of life, whether they're building that career, whether they are in that transition phase, or maybe they've sort of made it, but they just haven't connected all the dots. We are here to build that structure together, and 4 Points Wealth has done a terrific job of being able to blend all of these different models and take from different industries to be able to provide a sensible roadmap to build wealth and do it with a effective pragmatic approach. And so I think it's worth talking a little bit about what the industry, where it's been, where it is, and where it's going. And if you look at the roadmap of what financial services really looks like, you go back to the 1980s, and your typical stockbroker was a financial advisor effectively. I mean, that's really the training that a lot of older financial advisors got is, pick up and dial and dial and dial in for dollars. And that sales model kind of just has persisted over the last 30 or 40 years. And it wasn't really until the certified financial planning designation really made financial planning a big part of the financial services industry. So that's a little bit of history on kind of where we got and why it's here and why it's probably falling short for you is because at the core of it, it was sales based. It wasn't consultative. It wasn't coming in and trying to help you solve problems. It was trying to sell you something. And there's a whole host of stories and movies that have been created around this. And I've seen it myself. When I came through in my first early years, there was a lot of advisors that used to be the stock jocks, and then they had to adapt into becoming financial advisors. Now we're seeing the next generation of wealth advisors, financial advisors. They are coming at it from a planning first approach. And I think that that is a major change in where we were and where we're going. So with that said, there are kind of three different core models that you're seeing right now, and none of them is exactly perfect. And each one of these can be molded together to create a better system. And I think we can steal from each one of these. And we can also look outside of our industry to better understand this. And this is exactly what we've done at 4 Points Wealth, is we've looked at the best models out there, whether that is software development or just what we already have within our system to work with, and try to understand and build a model that is going to deliver the best services, the best things that you need, not that we're going to sell you on, and structure it in a way that makes the most sense. So you can, as the client, extract the most value from your advisor, from 4 Points Wealth. And I think it's incredibly important to understand the context. So the first way that we've seen in our industry is really commission based. I think that goes back in the, as long as we can remember, stocks were sold as a commission. And it used to be 7, 8, 9, 10% commission on a stock sale. And over time, we've seen the discount brokerages, the Schwabs of the world, that have really eradicated that type of structure. We still see it sometimes in mutual fund sales. We see it in some of the annuity products, some insurance products, where the commission approach is still alive and well. And there is actually a place for commission products. It's not that they're completely the worst or they're the most evil. But you have to understand what the motivation is behind somebody talking to you or trying to sell you something like this. And so, as a fiduciary advisor, just like I am at 4 Points Wealth, structured as a registered investment advisor as well as a CFP, we have that fiduciary relationship with our clients. The next phase is more of an asset-based approach, or AUM, you might hear it. And this is typically, 1.5 to 1, or something like that, of your assets under management. And that's fine. I use that as a great way to help my clients with their investment management needs. We charge an asset-based fee, and it's part of that investment management approach. And this is something that has been part of the system for not quite as long as the commission approach, but it's been around for quite a long time. And I think it's superior from a money management perspective relative to a commission approach. I think the assets under management approach is a much better way because it helps us understand and have better relationships with our clients. Because when a client gets a phone call from me and I say, hey, we're going to make a change to the portfolio, we are going to do that. And they know that it's not that I'm going to get compensated for a sell and a buy, or a buy and a sell, something like that. So really, asset base is going to be based on a percentage of assets under management. So that's going to be, if you've got $500,000, you're going to pay a percentage relative to that $500,000 that's under management with that advisor. But what I've found is that that doesn't necessarily align, because many millennials are not quite there. They might have a lot of money tied up in ESPPs or ISOs or RSUs that are at their company, and that really can't be managed, or that's not the right way to do that. They might have money tied up in a 401k, and that money can't be managed. So a financial advisor or financial services company would probably not touch that. They would say, yeah, we need to create revenue off this. We can't just have those assets sit idle and we can't really charge a fee on it. So they might not give you the service, they might not give you the attention that you really need. And this is where they might focus on that larger type of client. So this is where we see a lot of focus with retirees. Those folks that have already made their money, they're going to get the big rollover from the 401k once they retire. Then they have the million to 5, 10 to manage. Whereas the younger client, the younger worker, doesn't have that same type of situation. So they just don't get the service. They don't get the attention that they need. And yet they have so many specific needs. And then the last way that I've seen, and this is something that's been relatively new and it's been adopted by a lot of places, and it's something that we incorporate at 4 Points Wealth, is a project-based or fee-for-service type of approach. So you could think about this as similar to maybe like an attorney. They might charge by the hour, or you might think about it as your general contractor. They might come and do a project for you, and they do it specifically on a project base. This, to me, is now part of a bigger picture of how we do things at 4 Points Wealth, where we focus on the planning first. We build the project. We understand the client's needs. We understand what they need, and then what their goals are. What are their specific situation? What are all the pieces and intricacies that we can talk about? We can then look at that. We can build a specific plan. And what's so interesting about that is what I've seen is that every client has a very specific approach, and that no client is the same. And so it's a very unique process. They go through the same steps, and so it's very process oriented. But the result, or even the scope of planning that we use, is going to be very unique to that individual. And I've yet to see two plans that are identical, because each situation is going to be different. You might have kids, you might not have kids, you might be married, you might be getting divorced. There's a whole host of things that can skew things, where your plan is going to be very different than the next client that we meet with. And this approach, to me, is awesome, because it gets buy-in from both the financial advisor, me, and the client. And what I find is that when clients, I think about when you pay for something, you tend to value it more. So when you are charged for financial planning, you tend to value that thing more. And what it's a psychological approach, and it helps us with our biases. But when I ask you for a statement, guess what? You're likely going to be sending that. Versus if you give away planning for free, which I see this all the time, that you're not as engaged. And guess what? The advisor is likely not as engaged either, because they don't have an incentive to show you the true picture. What they do is they have an incentive to show you that without their financial products, you are not in a good place. And my goal as a financial advisor and with our approach here is to show you exactly what you are and nothing more and nothing less. And then if we then get to the other pieces, which is, maybe some holes, maybe some blind spots, we can talk about how our approach to investment management might be superior to what you're currently doing. Is maybe there's a hole in your risk management. Maybe you don't have enough life insurance. Maybe you have a whole host of things that could be going on. You might have a 401k. There's a whole thing that we can look at, and we can identify other things that might be able to fill those gaps and or uncover some blind spots. And this is where we start to look at those three different channels and bring them together. So if we have a commission-based product, life insurance typically is an asset-based, AUM approach that might be for investment management. And then you have a project-based or fee-for-service where you are actually doing the financial planning. And I've found that these three models, you can kind of pick and choose from each one of them. And again, if you have a fiduciary relationship with those clients, then you can articulate exactly how you're doing it, what you're doing, and the difference between those. So when I look at how we do things at 4 Points Wealth, we kind of a little sit in between really asset management or the AUM approach and the project base. And then we kind of incorporate some of that commission approach. But we don't go one way or the other exactly, because I think it really makes a lot of sense to understand the totality, the holistic approach to what your situation looks like. And I've seen this happen in a number of ways where it's been really successful. So I want to share a couple of ideas or a couple of stories. I had a couple come to me a couple of years ago, and they had worked with an advisor, and that advisor had generally been fee-based and commission-based. And they just felt like that he didn't care about them. And it was really, frankly, you could see that they had a small account with them, and they didn't really get the service, but they had all these other assets over here that they just didn't feel like he should know about, because they just didn't feel that they fully trusted him, and they had never done the planning. And so I walked them through our step-by-step process where we go through financial planning. We look at the investment management. We look at all the other pieces of the puzzle, and we were able to give them the guidance, the roadmap, and the execution process to create that clarity, to create the confidence, and then ultimately that roadmap to help them achieve their goals. And this was awesome because over the last 4 years that they've been clients, we've seen she shifted career. The wife has shifted careers, so that's resulted in a big change in their life. There was a big health situation that's created some challenges, and we've seen some really interesting things. But we've also been able to optimize situations where we were able to invest some of their money that was maybe sitting idle. We were able to optimize their investment strategy. So this was all done through our process, and they immediately recognized why this is so important. And immediately we built that trust, we built that camaraderie to understand that what you're doing right now is not great. Here's a better way. Another idea comes to mind is I had a couple, there was a lot of things going on. The guy was an early investor or early employee at a company. He had a bunch of ISOs or incentive stock options, and the company was going public. And so it was this big ordeal. It was a big event. It was awesome. And overnight, he became a multimillionaire. And it was a really cool thing because he never thought that was going to be possible. And sure enough, guess what? He's in a situation where he's got a bunch of money. And now we have to start thinking about tax strategy. So he had a concentration issue. What does that mean? He had so much of his wealth built into single stock. So what do we do there? What are some strategies? So we walk through step by step how we can eliminate some of that risk. And we can also talk about what the tax strategy is because of the low cost basis that he had on the stock and the massive gain that was there. It was just one of those things that we had to walk through step by step. And so this is something that we've done with a number of clients over the years, is help them through those transitions. And now we've gotten to a place where his portfolio is way more balanced. His total wealth is in a really good spot, and we've just seen it grow. And so that's allowed him to make some different changes in life. It's allowed him to start a new company. It's allowed him to do some really cool things within his, in his life that I think a more traditional approach really wouldn't have been doing that, or a DIY approach would have not done that at all, because he just didn't have the sense and the acuity to really understand where those different pieces fit. And so through our approach, we were able to have those conversations. And I think that had a huge impact. And I mean, he's even said it himself. This has had a huge impact on him and his wife, and they don't have that financial concern that they once had. And then another situation that I think is really cool that's worth talking about is I have this entrepreneur, and he's doing some really cool things. And it's so cool that he makes a lot of money from it. But it's not in a traditional route. It's lumps. It's, he might get, a couple million here. It might be a couple million over there. And then he doesn't have much going on for a little while. And then all of a sudden he gets hit with $1 million, 2, 3, 4 for some of the businesses that he's running. And then he's doing all these little side projects, and it's really cool to watch from a side. But also he has some financial concerns. He's a little bit worried about what's going on, and if he's going to be able to bridge the gap, or when's the next deal going to come. And so what we've been able to do is identify his cash flow or budget, and we were able to kind of get things streamlined so he could kind of understand all these inputs, the outputs, and then connect the dots between how all this stuff works. For example, he had no life insurance between him and his wife. They have a small kid. They've got this business. They got all these things going on, and they had no life insurance. And so we were able to identify that was going to be a big blind spot for them. So we were able to implement that process where we were managing their risk. We were able to do some investment management help for them. And that was all done through our wealth management approach, where we think about planning first, and we do the plan first. And then we start thinking about the execution. How do these different pieces fit together? And I think these 3 scenarios really highlight how our approach to wealth management is vastly different. It's not just investment management. It's not just financial planning. You get it all. You get every little piece. And I think that to me is what separates us from a lot of our competitors, and with what's going on in our industry. So with that said, I want to jump into kind of the 3 cornerstones of how we kind of build that framework. So the first is providing clarity, knowing what matters and what's next. We then build that confidence. So feeling informed, feeling in control. And then the ultimate is execution. And it's actually getting it done. It's with support. It's either DIY, done with you, done for you. There's kind of those 3 modalities, and we can provide that guidance, that insights, and those systems to then help those clients through the actual implementation. And so I find that most clients come to us with 2 of these things: clarity, confidence, or execution, but rarely all 3. In fact, if they have all 3, they usually don't need us. But more often than not, maybe they just have 1. Maybe they just have clarity, or maybe they've been doing it, but they have no idea how to connect the dots. And we build toward alignment across the board. So you might come and you kind of know what you need to do, and you've been sort of doing it, but you don't really know where you're going. And so you need to be saving for retirement, or you need to be doing X, Y, or Z. You need to have life insurance, and maybe you went and got it, but you don't really understand how that connects to your cash flow. You don't really understand how that connects to if you're going to be good if you have if you were to get laid off, or any number of issues that might bring up in your life. Or you might have clarity. You might know where you want to go, but you have no confidence in where and how to get there. You've heard that real estate's the best way to go. You've heard that life insurance as an investment is the best way to go. You've heard that being in the market, or doing X, or buying business, all of these different things, and yet you're not really sure which one works best for you. And then it's our job to then provide that confidence. If real estate is the approach, well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the steps that need to be achieved in order to then execute or go through the process. And then if you have that confidence, it's shocking how it makes life easier when it actually comes to making those decisions to execute or actually do the thing. So I think that those 3 things together, clarity, confidence, and execution, are what you get at the end of our wealth management approach. So what do we typically see as the gaps that people see? So what are some common triggers that I'm seeing with our clients that are coming into us? They have these, they might not necessarily call it, I don't have any clarity, I don't have any confidence, I lack execution ability. It's typically around income complexity. So this could be your equity compensation. This could be going out on your own. You're building a business. It could be that you're getting income sources from all different ways. You're doing a side hustle. There's a whole host of things. So income complexity is one of those triggers that might call you forward and say, you know what, it's gotten to a point. I used to be just W-2, and that was great. To that extent, it could be, you used to make 100,000 and now you make 400,000. I had a client come to me the other day and they're like, yeah, all of a sudden in the last 3 years, I've, almost quadrupled my income. And it was like, oh man, now they have got to talk about, these different structures. They've got commission, they've got W-2, they've got some other things that are coming their way. And with that, they're not sure how to do it. They're not sure what to do next. Another one is asset decision. So what is asset decision? This could be you've got a stock or a portfolio of stocks. You're not really sure what to do with them. This is a great time for people to have these conversations. And what I oftentimes find is that this is an issue between a husband and wife, for example, and the couple might have a little bit of a different opinion about how their money's being managed. I've seen this time and time again where the man typically has their portfolio and they're managing the family money, and the wife just doesn't feel like they're doing a good job, or there's no clarity, there's no transparency, there's really no confidence from one party of how they're doing things. And this, the husband might have been okay or reasonably successful, but it might just be something that it's created too much dissonance between the relationship. And maybe it's something that you're better off passing on to somebody else and outsourcing that. It might be a real estate situation. I've seen this a number of times as clients get into the real estate world, especially over the last 10 years. It's a great deal. They made a bunch of money, but they just don't like being landlords. This is a case I ran into not too long ago. They're like, you know what, it's been great. We've got the depreciation, the tax planning was all there, the tax situation was great, but just dealing with our tenants, it seemed like every Friday that they were about to leave town, tenant would call and there was something wrong with the toilet, a sink, a water leak, something was going on there. So that might be a situation, or maybe it's a business sale. So there's some issue or decision that needs to be made around some sort of investment asset. Related to this, but not necessarily tied exactly, is events. So financial events. This could be like an IPO of a company where you had ISOs or RSUs. That's certainly one of those big things. An inheritance. This is oftentimes during times of real challenge, because we're seeing a lot of our baby boomer parents are now dying, and it's super sad, and it's just the way of life. But a lot of times people are inheriting money, so they might be inheriting an IRA, in which case they've got to follow these particular rules. They might be inheriting a trust. They might be inheriting other assets, and so they just all of a sudden overnight had a more complex situation. It could be another career shift. You might be jumping from one career to another, or you might have been in a career for a long time and you're just like, you know what, I'm done with this. I want to try my hand at something else. And I've seen this a number of times here over the last 6 months, where I've just seen clients they did their post-college thing, and that post-college thing lasted for 10, 12, 15 years. And now they're just ready for something new. So I've seen that's a big life event as well. Or life transitions. This could be a marriage. This could be divorce. Sadly, 40, been married for 10 years. And now I'm starting to hear rumblings of friends that we went to their wedding where they're getting divorced. And that's an unfortunate thing. But again, it's just part of life. We have to kind of approach it with the pragmatic view. So that stuff happens. So whether you're getting married, getting divorced, you might be having kids. That's a big thing. You might be bringing on more children. We had this in our household. We had two. And then all of a sudden, we were bringing on a third. And with that, we had to buy new cars. We had to make some changes to our home just to accommodate for this third kid. So, these are some of the things that we've had to focus on in our lives. So I can only imagine that other people are also dealing with this. Starting a business. This is another life transition. Again, similar to that career shift, but what are some things that you need to think about as it relates to your family? That's not necessarily exactly financial, but how do you adjust that? How do you make that transition that makes a lot of sense for you? So it's these types of moments where clarity and strategy really matter the most. And that's where 4 Points Wealth can come in. And that's why we built the system around millennials, financial planning, investment management, and the whole approach that we take at 4 Points Wealth to gear our approach to those millennial clients and to those wealth builders. Because those other systems, the traditional approach to financial services, just didn't really work very well if you were a one size fits all. And so what we do is we incorporate all of these different things. We look at other industries, how they're doing it. And I think from that perspective, we've been able to build a great process that can have huge impacts. It can provide clarity, it can provide confidence, it can provide that roadmap, that execution that ultimately gets you to your goals that you're trying to achieve. And with that, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have concerns about where you are in your journey, I'd love to schedule some time for us to have a conversation to understand what that looks like. And it all starts with just a short introduction call.